Miftah, are we ready? Okay. You want to do your recording, brother? Bring it over here for a minute. Bismillah. All right. Okay. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. وقال الشيخ الإمام العلامة موفق الدين قدامة في كتابه لمعة اعتقاد الهادي لسبيل الرشاد: ومن صفات الله تعالى أنه متكلم بكلام قديم يسمعه من شاء من خلقه، سمعه موسى عليه السلام منه من غير واسطة، وسمعه جبريل عليه السلام ومن أذن له من ملائكته ورسله، وأنه سبحانه يكلم المؤمنين في الآخرة ويكلمونه ويأذن لهم فيزورونه. وقال الله تعالى: وكلم الله موسى تكليما. وقال تعالى: يا موسى إن اصطفيتك على الناس برسالاتي وبكلامي. وقال سبحانه: منهم من كلم الله. وقال سبحانه: وما كان لبشر أن يكلمه الله إلا وحي أو وراء حجاب. وقال سبحانه: فلما أتاها نودي يا موسى إني أنا ربك. وقال سبحانه: إنني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا فاعبدني. وغير جائز أن يقول هذا أحد إلا الله. وقال عبد الله بن مسعود رضي الله عنه: إذا تكلم الله بالوحي سمع صوته أهل السماء. وروي ذلك عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. وروى عبد الله بن أنيس رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال: يحشر الخلائق يوم القيامة عراة حفاة غرلا بهما فيناديهم بصوت يسمع من بعد كما يسمع من قرب: أنا الملك أنا الديان. رواه الأمة استشهد به البخاري. وفي بعض الآثار أن موسى عليه السلام رأى ليلة رأى النار فهالته ففزع منها فناده ربه: يا موسى. فأجاب سريعا استئناسا بصوت فقال: لبيك لبيك، أنا أسمع صوتك ولا أرى مكانك، فأين أنت؟ فقال: أنا فوقك وأمامك وعن يمينك وعن شمالك. فعلم أن هذه صفة لا تنبغي إلا لله تعالى. So we are on page 113 of the text, and it is unit 2, فصل في كلام الله عز وجل. So if we start, Brother Omar, from unit 2, the speech of Allah, Mighty Majestic.
So unit 2, the speech of Allah, Mighty and Majestic. One of the attributes of Allah, exalted be He, is that He is a speaker using eternal speech.
Okay, now this point is important. There's two things in this that the author has given us. One is that the use of the word qadim. Qadim. ومن صفات الله تعالى أنه متكلم بكلام قديم. So he mentions one of the attributes is that he is a speaker with eternal speech. Now, Al-Qadim is one of Allah's names, which means that He is without beginning. He is without beginning. Al-Qadim. And this is taken from the understanding of the first 3 generations. Now, you'll hear some people in this time saying, oh, there's no ayah or hadith from this. This is not true. Because the students of the Sahaba have transmitted the use of this word from the companions, and there is a narrative that mentions Qadim. So this is not true. Because Imam Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi in his book Al-Asma'i was-Sifat mentions Al-Qadim under that and cites that literature. So this is wrong. This is incorrect. So when someone says, "Oh, there's no name of Al-Qadim," no, that's not true. In Imam al-Bayhaqi's book Al-Asma'i was-Sifat, under the chapter on Al-Qadim, he mentions the narratives first three generations. This is not true. In addition to this, the reason why this was highlighted is because speech, the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks with speech that is uncreated, is one of the standout things of the 14 main attributes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in the Quran to distinguish between himself and false gods. There are 14 of these. The fact that there are 14 is what were agreed upon by the first three generations, i.e. the Hanbalis, and the early Maturidis. And this is taken from Imam Khalid al-Baghdadi, Diyauddin's book, Al-Iman wal-Islam, and other kutub as well. The Ash'aris will say 13 because they hold that Allah's power is a result of his creation. We'll come to this in a moment. So, there are 14 attributes where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used throughout the Quran, more than any of his other attributes, to distinguish between himself and a false god. 6 of them are attributes where Allah has negated things. 6 are where he's negated, and 8 are where he has affirmed. So we'll start with the 6 where he's negated. Okay. The first 6, al-wujud. Al-wujud. Existence. Al-wujud. Existence. Second is al-qidam. Al-qidam. Al-qidam is beginninglessness. Al-qidam, beginninglessness. Number 3, al-baqa, endlessness. Al-baqa, endlessness. Number 4, qiyamuhu binafsihi. Qiyamuhu binafsihi. Qiyamuhu binafsihi is self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency. Qiyamuhu binafsihi, self-sufficiency. 5, mukhalifatun lil hawadith, different from the creations. Mukhalifatun lil hawadith, different to his creations. Mukhalifatun lil hawadith, different to his creations. Number 6, wahdaniyya, one and unique. One and unique. One and unique. Now, the 8 include kalam, speech, which is under discussion right now. Kalam, speech. Al-basar, seeing. Al-basar, seeing. As-sama', as-sama', hearing. Hearing. Al-irada, al-irada, will. Will. Al-irada, will. Al-hayah, life. Life. Al-ilm, knowledge. Al-ilm, knowledge. Al-qudra, power. Al-qudra, power. This should be 8, yes? Number 8 is creation, which is either al-khalq or at-takween. It depends on which books you read. Maturidi books like this, they're going to say at-takween. At-takween. But the other books will have al-khalq. Okay? The Ash'aris will hold that creation is an expression of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, his expression of his qudra. But all of us are talking about the same thing. These are the attributes more than any other throughout the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a distinction between himself and false gods. I speak, they don't speak. I see all, they don't see. I hear all, they can't hear. I do all, they can't do anything. Right? I know all, they can't do anything. I do what I choose, they can't do anything of what they say. I'm alive, they're dead. Right? You hear the power being used. I'm one and unique. Look at all of them. All together, they can't do anything. Right? So all of these things that are being, I have no beginning. But there's a point in time where you made these. You had to carve them. I have no end. They can be toppled. Right? So all of these things are indicative of the fact of a true God and a false God when the distinction is being made. That's what these distinctions are. Right? So you see, this is what this is. This is what this is. That's why this distinction is made. Now, you may say, why did the Imam choose to just mention, why is there no fasl on irada? Why is there no fasl in the lum'ah? Why is there's fasl on kalam, but there's no fasl on irada? There's no fasl on his being all hearing. There's no fasl on his being all seeing. Okay, this is a good question. The reason for this is because the discussion within Ahl Sunnah, this discussion on Allah's speech, the Quran, will come up. Because of how some in the latter day, the Khalaf, interpret speech. When Ahl Sunnah are discussing with Ahl Bid'ah, the discussion on speech comes up again. Because they insist that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't speak. Right? So that's why this chapter is important and why other chapters won't come up, because most of the 72 sects have died out. They've been in common first few generations. Most of them have died out. The ones that are reoccurring, the Khawarij, which in this particular time are masquerading under the title Salafiyya. Mu'tazila come in and out of vogue, right? Qadiriyya and such, right? So, the Imam has mentioned this. So let's go to the next paragraph.
Whoever he was from his creation hears from him. The Prophet Musa alayhi salam heard from him without any mediator, as did the angel Jibreel alayhi salam, and whoever else he has given permission to from his angels and messengers.
Okay, so when we talk about hearing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this sense, we're talking about two things. We're talking about two things. Wahi, or tanzil. Wahi or tanzil. We're not saying that if someone is not an angel or a messenger or a prophet, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can't send them a sign, or they can't see a dream. This is not what we're talking about when we're talking about seeing Allah receiving speech from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not talking about that. We're talking about in the capacity of a prophet or a messenger. That's what we mean when we're talking about hearing the speech of Allah. Because someone could say, are you saying then that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't speak to righteous in dreams or show them signs? That's not the discussion here. The discussion is revelation and sending books, what we mean by speech of Allah. And this only comes from messengers in the form of angels or human beings. All right, let's continue.
He, glorified be He, will speak to the believers in the hereafter, and they shall speak to Him. he will give permission to them and they shall visit him. Allah exalted be he said, and Allah spoke directly to Musa. And the glorified one said further, Musa, indeed I have chosen you over the people with my messages and my speech.
All right, now could you read the ayah citations for those?
Sorry. And Allah spoke directly to Musa, and this was Surah An-Nisa, the 4th Surah, ayah 164. And Musa, indeed I have chosen you over the people with my messages and my speech. This is Surah Al-A'raf, the 7th Surah, ayah 144. The glorified one has also revealed, among them is who Allah spoke with directly. This is Surah Al-Baqarah, the 2nd Surah, ayah 253. And the glorified one has proclaimed, and it is not for a man that Allah shall speak to a man except by revelation or from behind a veil.
Okay, so we see here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except by revelation or from behind the veil. It's talking about messengers, right? Messengers, prophets, malaika, they're receiving this information. With respect to signs, wonders, things like that, that's different because we'd already done in Ramadan the presentation where Imam Ahmed anhu, had seen Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a dream, and we explained what that entails, what that means. So we're talking here specifically about the capacity of endorsing and sending forth messengers or prophets. That's what we mean we're discussing this.
And this was Surah Al-Shura, 42nd Surah, ayah 51. The glorified one has mentioned, so when he came to it, he was called Musa, indeed I am your Lord. This is Surah Taha, the 20th Surah, ayah 11 to 12. The glorified one also said, indeed I am Allah, there is no God but I, so worship me. This is Surah Taha, the 20th Surah, ayah 14. It is not possible that anyone could be saying this other than Allah.
Okay, now that seems like, well, that seems really obvious. We all know that. Yes, but for the Mu'tazila, who would say, well, this is the speech of Allah that's created, and that the angel Jibreel alayhi salam, he spoke it, and it wasn't spoken by Allah. This has to be stated for them. It has to be stated not only for them, but also the people without of Ahlul Sunnah. So within Ahlul Sunnah, of the people that are differing within Ahlul Sunnah about certain things, and external to Ahlul Sunnah. Even so much so the kuffar, because when we're talking about these ayat, say, well, these can't be except from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam isn't going to say, Innani ana Allahu la ilaha illa ana fa'budni. Indeed, I am Allah, there's no God but me, worship me. It's obviously not from him, right? He's giving this directly to us. Just the same thing as when a kafir said to me when I was in university that the Quran is the work of shaitan, Satan. I was like, what? He's like, yeah. I said, well, wait a minute. You do know every time before we recite Quran, we say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. That I seek refuge in Allah from the curse. So shaitan's giving it, but then telling you to seek refuge in him from it. All these other وَمَا بِقَوْلِ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. It's not the statement of any wicked Satan. So shaitan's telling you I gave this to you, but then telling you make sure to seek refuge in me. Well, I don't know about that. I said, let me show you. Right? These are the conversations that you have to understand. So the things might be obvious to us, but for a kafir, maybe not. People of innovation, maybe not. So these things are stated in a certain capacity.
The companion, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, may Allah be pleased with him, said, when Allah desires to speak revelation, the inhabitants of the sky hear his speech.
Okay, now his speech is, I've translated the word salt. Salt. Now, the early generations understood that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks with harf and salt. Okay. We're going to define it linguistically, and then we'll define it according to what's understood by the first generations. Harf linguistically means letter. Harf means letter. Just like when we did tajweed, we studied makharij al-huruf, right? The places of the letters, right? But this is harf, letter. Salt means sound or voice. So when I had to decide how to translate this, so I can't say voice because that's not what's entailed. Although in Arabic, linguistically that would make sense because linguistic Arabic, that's what it means. But the second sense of it is what's entailed. theologically speaking, they understand that the harf is that this means harf means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke this revelation. He spoke the revelation. Sawt is that they heard it. So the harf is that he spoke it. The sawt is that they heard it. That they heard it. So now you understand when I've translated it, that when Allah desires to speak revelation, the inhabitants of the sky hear his speech. That's why I've translated it as speech instead of voice. Linguistically be correct, but theologically I have to be accurate. His speech. So they heard the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And that has been narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Okay, so this is not just Abdullah Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Abdullah Mas'ud is transmitting it from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he's put this narrative from Abdullah Mas'ud radiallahu anhu here as kind of like a footprint. It's like a chain, so you can go back and trace what is this, which Imam Ad-Dumi gives us. If you can give Imam Ad-Dumi has said, وقال الدومي أشار هذا إلى ما رواه البيهقي في الأسماء والصفات عن عبد الله بن مسعود قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم.
Ad-Dumi has said, and this is an indicator of what has been narrated by Al-Bayhaqi in his work Al-Asma'i was-Sifat, in a narrative from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said,
إن الله عز وجل تكلم بالوحي سمع أهل السماء إلى السماء صلصلة كجر السلسلة على الصفا.
Indeed, Allah Mighty Majestic, when He speaks revelation, the inhabitants of the sky hear what is like a large chain being dragged over a boulder.
فيصعقون فلا يزالون كذلك حتى يأتيهم جبريل عليه السلام فإذا جاءهم جبريل عليه السلام فزع عن قلوبهم فنزع عن قلوبهم قال فيقولون يا جبريل ماذا قال ربك قال فيقول الحق قال فينادون الحق رواه أبو داود أيضا مرفوعا.
So they are filled with fright, and they remain like this until the angel Jibreel alayhi salam comes to them. When he comes to them, the fright leaves their hearts, and they say, "What did your Lord say?" The angel Jibreel alayhi salam responds, "He sent the truth." So they then call out, "The truth." This is collected by Imam Abu Dawood in a narrative that is attributable.
Okay, so the attributable marfu' means that it is we know the Prophet ﷺ said it because the companion attributes it to him, right? It's marfu'. So that's why he quoted the statement of Abdullah Mas'ud the way he quoted it, right? It's attributable. And Abdullah Mas'ud, he quoted the statement, he kind of truncated the full hadith when he mentioned it to someone else. But the full hadith is this one that was given. So this is the background to it. Right?
The companion Abdullah ibn Unais, may Allah be pleased with him, also narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah will gather the creation on the day of resurrection naked, barefoot and uncircumcised.
Okay, now there's just something I missed. It's barefoot, naked, uncircumcised, and with nothing. Buhmen. I missed that one off. That's a typo. And with nothing.
He will call them with speech.
Okay, and obviously I've translated again, salt, bisultan yasma'uhu.
That they will hear from far away, just as they will hear it from near. I am the king, I am the judge. This has been related by the noble Imams and meets the requirements of Imam al-Bukhari.
Okay, now, Imam Wafiddin Qudam rahimahullah, he knows what he's doing when he does this. Okay, so he said this was narrated by the Imams and meets the requirements of al-Bukhari. Now, this is very important. When Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah, wrote his al-Jami' al-Sahih, the conditions that he set, because this is a particular genre of hadith, which is known as al-Jami' al-Sahih al-Musnad literature. This is a specific form of hadith. And this literature is based upon looking for the ahadith, the extracts that fit the subject headings. So, Imam al-Bukhari is looking subject headings, and then he fills those subject headings with hadith. And it might just be the extract, so it doesn't give you the asbab al-wurud, the background of the hadith, why it happened, all the narrative. It may just be that extract with some of the narrators. Imam al-Bukhari, in addition to this, has set his own parameters on the type of ahadith he wants to collect. In which case, these ahadith are ahad. They are one from one. So he's taking them one from one. Now, because he's taking them one from one, he insists that it has to be decisively known that these narrators met personally. Like you can historically establish that they actually personally met. They weren't just in the same class, but they actually personally met one from one. Every name of every narrator has to be decisively known. His kunya, his name, his father, all these other things. In addition to this, he can't have any time where his mind was weakened. Maybe he had a head injury or something like that. He can't have any of those things. Right? So all of these things that he set are parameters that he himself set for his hadith. So when Imam Muwaffaq al-Qudam rahimahullah says, this was narrated by the Imams and it fits the requirements of al-Bukhari, which is one of the strictest requirements for his collection. He says, so there's no doubt about the authenticity of this hadith. Because if it meets Imam al-Bukhari's stringent requirements, Imams that don't even have those requirements, it should be perfectly fine. That's why he did that. So he's introducing that into your mind. There's no doubt about this hadith. There's no doubt about it. That's why he's entered this into your mind. So then he has قال الدومي منهم الإمام أحمد وأبو يعلى الموصلي والخرائطي في مساوي الأخلاق والطبراني والحاكم والضياء المقدسي يعني ضياء الدين في المختارة عن عبد الله بن أنيس الأنصاري رضي الله عنه.
Ad-Dumi has said, and from among them is the Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Abu Ya'la al-Mawsili, al-Kharaiti in Musawi al-Akhlaq. In addition to that, it was also collected by Imams At-Tabarani, Ad-Diya al-Maqdisi, in al-Mukhtara, from the narrative of Abdullah ibn Unais al-Ansari.
Okay, so he's put this in here now to say, from among them, meaning the noble Imams that collected this. So this meets the requirements of Bukhari. And among them that collected this hadith is Ahmad ibn Hanbal. No one arguing about him. Abu Ya'la al-Mawsili, famous Hanafi scholar, hadith scholar from Iraq and Mosul. Right? Al-Kharaiti, famous Shafi'i scholar. Right? And in addition to that, it's also been collected by At-Tabarani. And then you also have Diya al-Din al-Maqdisi. Now we discussed about this before. He is one of the muhaqqiqeen in hadith. So if he or Dhahabi says, this hadith, we checked through the narrators and examined it, then there should be no argument then at that point. Because of the nature of the muhaqqiqeen, the hadith checkers. Okay. Continue.
In one narration, it has been mentioned that the Prophet Musa alayhi salam was scared and recoiled the night he saw the fire at the burning bush. But his Lord called him, Musa. He answered quickly to the speech he heard. I am here are your service. I hear your words, but I do not see your place.
Okay, so your words, soltik, right? So I hear the salt, but I do not see your place. So he's here, he heard the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then he says, I do not see your place. Now this is an important portion because the prophets alayhimus salam all come from eras in which there is the use of magic, there are demons, there are devils, everything else. So Nabiyuna Musa alayhi salam is doing what? He's making sure to test, is this really my Lord? So now he's subjecting it to a battery of tests. How do you know that this is from your Lord? So he says, I hear your words, but I don't see your place. Where are you? Okay, continue.
Where are you? Allah said, I am above you, in front of you, on your right and on your left. He then knew that no one possessed this attribute except Allah, exalted be He.
Okay, so now he established it. So if you say, he said, where is your place? Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by saying, I'm above you, in front of you, to the right of you, is confirming, I'm not bound by place. So now he knows, no one has this attribute but Allah. Because a jinn or any human being or the grace, I'm right in front of you. I'm in back of you, right? Or I'm right next to you. Or here I am. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, no, above you, front of you, right, left, right? That's saying subhanallah. Now, someone may say, well, he mentions above. Someone may ask, he mentions above, in front, right, left. How come he didn't mention under and in back of? Right? Why wasn't it mentioned in front of, in back of, or under? Because the other directions encompass that. And in addition to that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his ulu, which is mentioned here, the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is exalted and distinct from his creation, his ulu would preclude being under, because under usually implies lowliness. Right? And behind usually implies not knowing stuff. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by saying above you, in front of you, right, left, it encompasses all of that, but at the same time, it doesn't lower his rank either. So his full rank is given. Right? Let's continue.
He then knew that no one possesses attribute except Allah, exalted be He. The Prophet Musa alayhi salam said, likewise, so you are, my God.
Okay, so we said, فَقَالَ كَذَلِكَ أَنْتَ يَا إِلَهِي.
Is this your speech, or the speech of your messenger?
Okay, so he says, أَفَكَلَامُكَ أَسْمَعُ أَمْ كَلَامُ رَسُولِكَ. Is this your speech that I'm hearing, or the speech of your messenger? So now this is what he's trying to establish. Right? Let's go.
Allah said, on the contrary, it is my speech, Musa.
Okay, so he says, on the contrary, it is my speech. Now this is very important. It's important because it establishes that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is revealing has come from him. So what he's hearing is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech. And the revelation being given, yes, this is from him. Now, this brings up an issue. When the Mu'tazila said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the Mu'tazila very much favored a doctrine that we discussed before. We've used it in English, but I'll give the Arabic and then we'll explain it. We've been through this before because we've been through Sharh Sunnah and other kutub. This doctrine is known as the doctrine of Tanziyah. Doctrine of Tanziyah. Okay? It's known as the doctrine of Tanziyah. Ta, nun, zay, ya, ha, or T-A-N-Z-Z-I-H. Tanziyah. The doctrine of Tanziyah. The doctrine of Tanziyah is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in need of and is distinct from the creation and any imperfections. This is the doctrine of Tanziyah. The Mu'tazila espouse the doctrine of Tanziyah. And because of that, they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not speak because speaking requires lips, using of the larynx, throat, and all these other things. So because of this, the Quran is not the speech of Allah uncreated, is created, because the angel Jibreel alayhi salam is the one who spoke it. The Mu'tazila say it's a hakaya or an ibadah. It's an expression of the speech of Allah. Because the speech of Allah can't be heard. Because if the speech of Allah can be heard, or if the speech of Allah can be perceived, then that means it's like human speech. So you'll hear some of the Mu'tazila say, well, Nabiyyuna Musa alayhi salam, when the speech of Allah was given, his skin moved or quaked. But he didn't hear. He didn't hear. You say, well, wait a minute. Then how do you deal with the hadith that we just quoted before? The marfu of Abdullah Mas'ud, but then the full extension of that hadith, that the malaika, when the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was spoken, the malaika heard what was like a chain being drug over a bowl. Like they heard the power, so they heard that speech, but they were so overwhelmed they passed out. Not that they didn't hear it, they were so overwhelmed they passed out. So they woke up, and he said, "What did you hear?" They said, "The truth." And that's when the Malaika said, "Al-Haq," the truth. So how do you deal with that? The Mu'tazila say, well, it has to be that this is not the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to be created. It's coming for the creation. So when Nabi Musa Islam heard the speech of Allah in the burning bush, he said, no. That was a voice that was created in the bush. Right? Because we have to maintain the doctrine of Tanzih. We have to maintain it. To which the problem with that, though, is here's the problem. In the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given salam by a rock. Given salam by a rock. Now the questions we now have to ask is: did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, did he hear the speech from the rock? Yeah, he did. Okay. Did he respond? Yeah, it'd be implied not to. But the rock gave him salam. Now from here we see speech can be heard and can be delivered without a larynx, without a throat, and without vocal cords. So just because we say speech has been heard, it doesn't mean it has to come from the normal human elements that we understand. Now this is a rock. Or we go to the Sunan of Ibn Majah, what's known as the Hadith Gharib, the strange Hadith, where the tree came and made sajda and then gave salam to Rasulullah. Okay, so obviously that tree, as far as we know, because we've checked trees, but none of us here is an arborist, but as far as we know, trees have no larynx, they got no throat, right? They've got no vocal cords, yet they somehow delivered speech. We have the hadith in the Sahih al-Bukhari where Ahban ibn Aus was spoken to by the wolf. That spoke. And the wolf has the trestle tongue, so I don't know how it said sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it did. And it said, because he chased the wolf away and said, get away from the sheep, and the wolf turned and stood on his hind legs and said, and who will safeguard them on the day where there's none to safeguard them? The man said, oh, this is a wondrous miracle. Ahban ibn Aus. And the wolf said, do you know a greater thing than this though? He said, what? Is the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, how with a smooth tongue that was protrussal, it was able to, I don't know, but it did. It's a fact. I can't argue it. Because Ahban ibn Aus went to him and entered Islam immediately. Now, these are all examples of speech that are happening with creation. The rock and the tree especially, because there's no vocal cords or anything involved. So speech doesn't imply that there has to be vocal cords and everything else. Now, these are creations. Allah made them do this. That should show you that his speech is even more exalted and greater than that. But it can be heard as well. It's heard, it's spoken by him, and it's heard. So when the Prophet Musa alayhi salam says, is this your speech? I'm hearing the speech of your messenger. He says, Bal kalami ya Musa. It's my speech. So we understand it's the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Mu'tazila said, because of the doctrine of Tanzih, we say that these things, it could lead to creation. They say, look, well, we don't say that Allah's as-Sami', the all-hearing. Why? Because you have to hear with conclave. Hair inside your eardrums. And this acts like a satellite dish, the cartilage around here, and the sound goes in and goes back and forth and comes back out. Ah, I've heard something. And the Doppler effect, when your car gets stolen, you hear the sound of it going further away, right? All of that is coming from being able to hear. They say based upon that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not, he doesn't hear. He's not all here. And then he's not al-Basir. Why? Well, that implies eyeballs. That implies eyes. What? Where did you get the understanding that implies? Their doctrine of Tanziyah, as much as they say they're declaring Allah free of all shortcomings, everything else, actually is them declaring Allah to have shortcomings because their only perception is that the attributes naturally have to be humanistic. So now you understand when they're beating Sufyan ibn Uyayna not Sufyan ibn Uyayna, one of the others, and during the Inquisition, and they're saying, what is as-sami'ul basir? And he says, huwa as-sami'ul basir. Wa ma huwa? But what is it? Because they're saying, we know the meaning of it. We know the meaning of it, and it could only be a human meaning. But the first few generations, like they're supposed to say, is saying, we don't know. We know that all hearing, all seeing. But it's different to human beings. So when they're asking him, what does it mean? And he's saying it means this. He's saying, that's all I have, that's all I know. Which gives you a good idea of understanding what the creed of the first few generations was. But it's important because now we have in this time people that will do the same thing. That will say, well, no. When you say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has this sifa, you are associating partners with Allah or guilty of blasphemy. See, they used to call you a kafir. 30 years ago, they would call you kafir. Now they say blasphemer because they became more politically correct. But they used to call you a kafir. But they say, well, when you affirm this sifa, this sifa can only mean this. Who told you it can only mean that? Because the first three generations had all the same things that we have, but they didn't come to that conclusion. Only the people of Bid'ah did. So, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech, just like all the other attributes, we affirm it, and it's true. Now, we don't understand or know the reality of it, but it's true, because He's given it in His revelation, in His book, and those are the facts of it. And it is a real attribute, in the sense of that it exists. It's not a metaphor like the Mu'tazila say. This is a metaphor. Well, if it's a metaphor, it has no reality. So if it has no reality, then why is it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the attribute here? Well, it's a reference to this. And the Mu'tazila had the same situation, where they say when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the attribute of yed or hand, it's in reference to His power. So in reality, there is no sifa known as yed. It's only a reference to His power. Okay. Now, later down the line, some Muslim brothers, students of knowledge, read Mu'tazila books and Ash'ari books and said, oh, well, these are the same people, they're Mu'attila. They're guilty of the same thing the Mu'tazila are guilty of. This is a mistake from two standpoints. And it's an example of something being true but not true at the same time. True enough, the Ash'aris use the same terminology as the Mu'tazila because they came out of them. The Ash'aris came out of the Mu'tazila. They're not the same as the first three generations, which was handed down. The Mu'tazila was a madhab that was built. And so because it was built, it evolved. And because it evolves and has been built upon, this is what's happened. Now the Ash'aris came out of the Mu'tazila. And so they use the same terminology but mean often different things. So, when they're both using ilm al-kalam or speculative theology, the Ash'ari will say the attribute of yed, the Mu'tazila will say the attribute of yed is not an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's say it's not an attribute. Because yed can only mean appendage in the Arabic language. When we look at it, it's only a jariha. It's only that. Can't be meaning anything else. Therefore, it must be a metaphor. The Ash'aris read that ayah. They say that the attribute of yed, this attribute, they say it's a reference to His power. So they're not denying the sifa. They're just saying it's another word for this. It's a reference. Understand this very carefully, because this is the distinction between the people that hold the Ash'aris or Ahl Bid'ah and the people that think, well, because they use the same terminology as Mu'tazila, they mean different things. Reading the Ash'ari books without understanding of the principle could lead you to falling into the Mu'tazila or lead you to think that they are Mu'tazila. But understand that just because the terminology is the same doesn't mean that they pour the same meanings into it. Because if that was the case, Imam Wafid ibn Qudam and others, they would have killed Ibn Asakir. But they didn't. They didn't. Ibn Asakir was Ash'ari. They didn't. Salah ad-Din Ayyubi, they never would have prayed behind him or battled with him against the others, because to fight the people of innovation is a greater battle than the kuffar. But they didn't. They fought in the same battle. And Salah ad-Din Ayyubi was Ash'ari. We have his kutub, we have his writings, we know that he was an Ash'ari. There's no dispute about this. Nuruddin Zinki was Ash'ari. There's no argument about this. Imam Shamsuddin ibn Qudama is the teacher of Imam Nawawi in hadith and i'tiqad. And i'tiqad. If one of them thought the other was a kafir or guilty of it, someone would have been dead. Just like what's suppressed now. Imam Ibn Qayyim is the teacher of the Musnad to his Subki. He is a Subki's teacher. But it's hidden nowadays because there's an agenda that some people have. But everybody knows that Ibn Qayyim is the teacher. Who in the 700s is learning the Musnad that's not learning from Ibn Qayyim? How are you learning the Musnad? Just like in this day and age. How are you learning the Musnad through Ahmad Shakir? Ahmad Shakir, which is the best riwayah, how are you learning it from him? You can't unless it's going through a bunch of Hanbalis. These are just facts. And if people thought these people were kuffar or mushriks or whatever else, they wouldn't have done it. The same thing with Tabarani. A bunch of Hanbalis. How are you going to go through these? Right? But what's happened today is people have allowed their arguments. Some of the students of knowledge from the Ash'aris have allowed these arguments because they're reading these books in isolation. And so there's now brothers that are running around because of two students of knowledge in particular, but their names don't deserve mention in the Arab world. But there's brothers now that are out here in Dar al-Kufr or have taught people in Dar al-Kufr that if you are not Ash'ari Maturidi, that you're Mujassim or you're not from Ahlul Sunnah, they have taught this. But the same people, though, when you think of the very elders of the Ash'ari, like Imam al-Bulti, who'd been to Duma countless times, and learn from Ismail Badran, who's a Hanbali, who is not an Ash'ari. We have his kutub, we have his statements, he's not an Ash'ari. Abdul Rahman al-Shami is not an Ash'ari. Imam Salih al-Shami is not an Ash'ari. None of my teachers, with the exception of one, was an Ash'ari. Right? So you have to start asking yourself, how did you learn? Did you study fiqh? Yeah. Did you study i'tiqad? Yeah. Did you study hadith? Yeah. How, if the people that you would have learned from in Damascus would have been Mujassim, they would have been kafirs? Because Imam Bulti sat with them, he learned from them. These people learn from them. What are they doing? These Mujassim you're talking about teaching in Jami Bani Umayyah, aren't they kafirs? Well, no. Okay. Then we know that what you're saying is nonsense. The fact of the matter is this. Brothers are being drawn into debates that aren't their debates for three reasons. Number one, these brothers, they don't understand the kutub that they're reading. Themselves, they don't understand what they're reading. And then number two, they don't understand the kutub of others. Before you delve deeply into the affairs of discussions within Ahlul Sunnah, you have to understand what's agreed upon first, before you get into what's not agreed upon. Just like with fiqh, you have to understand what you're supposed to do before you can start comparing notes. Oh, he's doing it. You have to understand what you're supposed to do. The second is, the brothers that want to get involved with comparative i'tiqad don't know enough about the i'tiqad that we're all agreed upon. There's about 7 masail, 7, that Hanbalis, Ash'aris, Maturidis, 7 that they differ in. 7. People are making it seem like we're talking about different religions. But these are the nonsense things. But if we look at it, what we do find is that they were agreed upon fighting in the Crusades against the Crusaders. For some reason, that they were agreed on that. They fought in Spanish against the Spanish and the Inquisition for 500 years, and they fought Sophia. And they fought the British invasions, and they fought the French invasions. And they've had 1,100 years, 900 years to hash out these battles if someone was kafir. But their books are with us today. The second and third things of this three prong is some of the brothers that are students of knowledge that are getting involved in these battles don't understand the terminology that they are using. all of Ahl Sunnah is clear that the people that say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resembles his creation are guilty of major shirk, because that's what's in the Quran. Whoever likens Allah with his creation, everything else. These people say, well, this person's a mujassim, but he's not a kafir. I don't mean he's a kafir. So then what is he then? People are using these terms on people, saying, yeah, this person's a mujassim. This person is this. They don't even know the terminology they're using. This person's mu'attil. He's denying the sifat of Allah. If someone denies the sifat of Allah, he's a kafir. But people are using it. No, I don't mean he's a kafir. So then what is he? He's a cocker spaniel, but he's not a dog. He's a duck, but he's not a mallard. It's cheddar, but it's not cheese. This is nonsense. This is nonsense. The final point to these three things that I want to say is these debates that brothers have started, and again, it's not started in person, it started online over the computer, that great bastion of intellectual repository, the internet. It started for brothers getting involved in debates. And these are brothers that will never meet you in person, but some of them think that you're a kafir. Or other brothers think other brothers are kuffar and call them murtads and everything else. You've never even met me in person. But these battles have been had. The same thing when I got here in person. There's brothers that never met with anyone else because they said, oh, they go to that masjid over there. They're kafirs, that's it. Wait a minute, hold on, what? And there's no need to meet them or have any conversation. Well, what if you're wrong? We won't be. They're kuffar, that's it. Well, what if they have questions? There are no questions. SubhanAllah. I mean, if I was like that, I couldn't have met half of the people I met here. I mean, sometimes brothers come and visit, and you brothers have witnessed it. Sometimes someone will come to the house, or when we were at the institute, they'd come there and they would say open kufr in front of me, and I wouldn't say anything. Not because I'm fine with kufr, but I understand, okay, he doesn't mean that. He just doesn't know the words that he's saying and what they entail, and he's trying to explain himself. But he said some open kufr in front of me. But you have to understand, and that requires patience. Just this last Jumu'ah, I'm walking on the way to Jumu'ah. Someone misunderstood something that I had said in the past. I'm on the way to Jumu'ah. He got out of the car. He threatened to kill me. It's on a main thoroughfare. But I had to be patient and everything else. I said, listen, here's my phone number, everything else. Yeah, if I find out what I understand is true, then you better look. Okay, that's fine. He's trying to kill me. Now, you have to understand, forget the severity of threatening to kill somebody and, the measures you have to take to safeguard and all this other stuff. Forget that for the second. Understand that those are the people that you have to understand. They don't understand. So what? Because he threatened, I kill him? I was like, yeah, I wasn't sure he was going to kill, so I kill him. No. You have to understand the people that are in that condition are in that condition because they've been drugged into battles that they don't know anything about. Arguments they know nothing about. With people that know nothing about the subject matter themselves. That's why you have to be careful about this stuff. And the affairs of the creed and our doctrines are important to understand because we avoid argumentation. The necessity of which we'll come to in the matan and the sharh is to avoid argumentation, disputation, because it's that is a hole that anyone can fall in and twist his or her ankle. You can fall in a hole and get your ankle twisted because you're in a debate and argument, and before you know it, you've missed reading a portion of the Quran, you've missed it because you were so busy getting angry. And when you're angry, it's hard to sit and focus on other things because you just think, I've got to beat this person, or I've got to overwhelm them, or I've got to refute. But we have to get past that. Right? So, I say all of this to say that the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran that we have, from the standpoint of the kafir, is the same Quran that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad Abdullah, all those years ago. It was given to us. So we say this to them without any doubt because we have the same information that's been given to us. To the Ahl Bid'ah, among the Muslims, we say this isn't the speech of an angel. It's not the speech of a jinn. It's not the speech of a creative force. This is the speech of Allah that's been given. Otherwise, you wouldn't be commanded to make wudu before you touch it. Right? Within Ahl Sunnah, to the Ash'ariyah and later Maturidiyah, we say the first three generations say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks with harf and sawt. It is part of the attribute. It's the truth. And to avoid confusion, you should leave alone getting into detailed discussions on Neoplatonist philosophy, because the common layman is not in the best condition to deal with these things at any time. And this is why your big imams like Imam Sanusi, who was 900 Hijri, as well as Imams al-Bulti and others, have left alone this discussion. If you look at Imam al-Bulti's books and others, Imam Wahib al-Zuhaili, they've not covered this discussion in depth because they recognize that the amount of argument that came around this issue in the Khalif is enough, and it's sufficient to leave it, which is what's best to do. So I say, أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم أستغفر الله إن الله غفور رحيم الحمد الرحيمين. Are there questions of what we've covered so far today on our second unit? Questions? Yes, young man. Salam alaikum.
Is it true to say that Arabic is the language of the angels?
So the question is whether it's true to say that Arabic is the language of the angels. Alhamdulillah. You could say it is a language. Here's how we know that. In the hadith on the Al-Isra wal-Miraj, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned seeing an angel with 70,000 heads. And on each head were 70,000 mouths, and each mouth was 70,000 tongues. Glorifying Allah in languages, some which I know and some which I don't know. So what that implies within that narrative is that the Malaika, certainly some of them do utilize it. But to say that it is solely their language, we don't have a text for, because it mentions that language and others besides. So another question. Yes. Salam alaikum.
The question is on the narration on the inhabitants of the sky. I know you mentioned the angels, but is it talking about other inhabitants in the sky as well?
Okay, so the question is about the narrative that mentions the inhabitants of the sky. Hear it. Is this narrative, normally when we hear the narrative, the Ahl al-Samat, the people of Samat, we're talking about the Malaika, but is it talking about other creations as well? Alhamdulillah. This is a good question. I'll have to look this up and research and come back to you for next week, inshallah. So before we start the class, I'll mention if I found anything different. But all the references when I've found Ahl al-Samawat or Ahl al-Samat, I've usually always found the expression right after Yani al-Malaika. But if it's something else, I will find out, inshallah. Other questions? Yes, sir.
On page 119, quoting, I am above you, in front of you, on your right and on your left. But as you mentioned, it's not mentioned below you or behind you. Some people, not specifically about this, but some people may have the incorrect theology, who may say out of ignorance that Allah is everywhere. Would you say that this negates that? Because if it was the case that it was everywhere, it would be said that under you and behind you, and this also indirectly negates that in that sense.
Okay, so the question is about how some slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might understand incarnationalism, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is everywhere with his essence, and whether or not this statement would be a sound negation of that discussion of incarnationalism or pantheism or everywhereness and the like. Alhamdulillah. This is correct, because when you have double-ended statements, because often people will make a double-ended statement. If someone says Allah is everywhere, that could mean that they believe that Allah is everywhere with his essence, which this is obviously incorrect. This is falsehood. But if they mean that Allah is everywhere, that he knows everything and is knowledge, yeah, this is correct. But we always assume when we hear someone using double-ended statements, we assume that they mean the correct thing. We wouldn't assume anything else unless he said that, and Allah is in me, he's in you, right? Then we have to say, well, no. You're incorrect here because of this. And again, it comes, some of this, it wasn't as prevalent before as it is now. Now you will hear more Muslims make statements sometimes like this because we've gone to school with Christians or former Christians, And we've been infected because they say, well, Jesus is in me, God's in me, God's in you. And we've heard this. We've seen now people have pages that Jesus is my homie or Jesus is my best friend, right? And now you see that most of you start to see Muslims have Allah is my homie. But there's an overlap that's there because if you're around something long enough, it can influence you. So the problem with that is that's definitely something to discuss Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ulu and to negate that false understanding. That's definitely something that should be used to negate incarnationalism. That is a sound text you could use for that. And it's something that has to be explained to people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is distinct from his creation and different to his creation. When that's understood, then other topics often become easier to digest. But when you start talking about inside, outside, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discussing these things is baseless because place and time and things like this, they don't apply. As Ali said, he is without place, without time, and he is now as he ever was. Right. Any other questions? Yes.
When it mentions about the 14 attributes, so they're established by the first few generations, is there a specific text which mentions all 14 of them?
Okay, so the text, a specific text regarding the 14 attributes, and are there texts that mention these? Alhamdulillah. Yes. Imam Ahmed, in his letter to Astakhri, it's narrated through Astakhri, one of his students, he mentions these. Imam Abu Hanifa, his students, rahimahumullah, because it's whether you think Imam Abu Hanifa wrote Fiqh al-Akbar or not, blah, 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 they allude to it in al-Fiqh al-Akbar. They allude to it in al-Fiqh al-Akbar. So even if you say, okay, Imam Abu Hanifa, he didn't write al-Fiqh al-Akbar. Okay, if he didn't write it, we say it was the students that collated it based upon what he had said to them. Okay, that's fine. We're still in the second age going into the third, because al-Qadir wa Yusuf and others, it's still the second age going into the third. So that still stands. So those people, those are two places where I could say you could look and find it either in Imam Ahmed's case more explicit, but it's alluded to in that place. So, any other question? Okay, so we'll close from here, and next week, inshallah, we will be looking at Unit 3, في صفة القرآن الكريم, the attribute of the Quran being from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech. We'll be looking to go through there. And then we will also be starting seeing the Creator, majestic is mentioned, unit. So we'll be looking at units 3 and 4, inshallah, and taking a look through there. So we say, Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk innahu ghafurur rahim hamid rahim wa la ilaha illa Allah. Wassalamu alaykum.